At first glance, Smeargle is a letdown. It actually has a lower base stat total than a Rattata. In fact, Smeargle to this day is tied with Solo Wishiwashi and Shedinja for lowest stats of a fully evolved Pokemon. But if that's the case, then how is it possible that this terrible Pokemon ruined the game of competitive Pokemon multiple times across 2 generations and made a lot of players very, very angry? And to one-up that, how did Smeargle become so despised that there were calls for the Pokemon Company in 2016 to take action that were actually answered? To find out, we'll be going over every time Smeargle has ruined competitive Pokemon, starting with the 3rd generation. The most popular competitive old generation format, Gen 3 OU or the Advanced format. Which is crazy, by the way, that a format from 2004 is the most popular old format today. Gen 3 stands in the comments? Where you at? Anyways, Advanced didn't always have the same rules that we know and love today. This is because one particular team style had to go through a series of bans without turning a PvP game into solitaire with extra steps. I am talking, of course, about full baton pass teams. A playstyle that involves gathering so many boosts, passing them throughout your team, and preventing your opponent from forcing you to switch to get rid of the boost. You basically do this until you have enough boosts to sweep your opponent's entire team. This strategy aims to never interact with the opponent until they lose. Gen 3 Baton Pass has undergone so many restrictions and nerfs that we could spend a whole video covering them all, but Smeargle is largely responsible for Baton Pass being hacked away to an inch of its life. It dates back to Gen 3's heyday, when Smeargle was a staple on full Baton Pass chain teams, not even because it packed a boosting move, but because of the move Ingrain, a move that is mainly learned by grass types that prevent the user from being forcibly switched by Roar or Whirlwind, which is typically how you deal with Pokemon boosting constantly. Ingrain also gradually heals you. Of course, conveniently, Ingrain doesn't prevent you from switching yourself out or using Baton Pass, and the extra recovery helped them boost more to create unbreakable substitutes, especially helpful in the face of Tyranitar's permanent sand. And here's why we see Smeargle, despite having some of the worst stats in the game, be so broken. But before we talk about why, here's another game with over 1,000 monsters. This video is sponsored by Summoner's War Sky Arena. Summoner's War is one of the original and most popular mobile turn-based RPGs of all time, with more than 240 million downloads worldwide. And they want to celebrate 11 years with their 11th anniversary event. Players can receive up to 200 free 11th anniversary scrolls. Each scroll summons a 3-star to 5-star monster and will even include premium light and dark monsters. You're also able to select a total of 10 monsters from all previous Hall of Heroes. The Hall of Heroes is a special dungeon where players can earn summoning pieces for a specific 4-star monster. Each selected monster will have its respective Hall of Heroes dungeon open for week 1. And let me tell you, for a free game, this game has so much to do. In fact, there's so much content for free players that players have reached the highest bracket off of just free-to-play stuff. You can collect monsters, team build, and strategize to win against other players in PvP. And even if PvP isn't your forte, which I highly doubt, but regardless, there are tons of solo dungeons that you can run through with your optimally built monster. And I know you'll enjoy building these monsters with their different rune sets. And you can invite your friends to a guild to have guild wars. That's right, you, your monsters, and your Nakamas against other guilds. And they've got a very generous 11th anniversary offer. Use this in-game code on screen for 10 11-year special scrolls, 1 legendary scroll, 20 mystical scrolls, and 5 million mana stones. So if you want to play one of the biggest mobile turn-based RPGs of all time and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can use my link in the description to download Summoner's War Sky Arena for free. The reason why Smeargle is so powerful and infuriating to fight against is because it can learn any move, and therefore can learn move combinations that were simply not meant to be used together. Substitutes were essential to the success of Baton Pass since they guarded them from being devastated by critical hits, and were a major reason why once the Baton Pass train got rolling, it was often genuinely unstoppable, since even if you landed a critical hit, you were probably just dunking into a sub. Smeargle was the only Pokemon in the game that could learn Ingrain, as well as literally any boosting move, and Baton Pass, and thus Ingrained Smeargle was identified as the single most troubling aspect of Baton Pass to precedent-breaking extents. When Gen 3 OU returned to the tournament spotlight years later, concerns were raised about new players trying to use Baton Pass to eke out free wins without really understanding the metagame, because indeed that is the issue at the core of Baton Pass. If you think you can outskill your opponent, you don't use it, because the team more or less plays itself, and it would be silly to risk a poor matchup when you don't need to. If you you don't think you can outskill your opponent, Baton Pass gives you a way to ignore the skill gap without having to really work for it. You just have to get the right matchup, and seeing how powerful Baton Pass is with such limited answers, this is an alarmingly high percentage strategy. Ingrain really drove this home. No other Baton Passer learned the move, and it's far too all-encompassing in how it handled basically everything. Thus, Ingrain Smeargle was banned, and they say Ironhead Jirachi can't be banned in Gen 4. But jokes aside, the idea was that Baton Pass teams without Ingrain Smeargle were terrible. After all, up until that point, the most successful frightening Baton Pass teams hinged on it so hard, and the rest were easy to manage in comparison. Too bad easy to manage in comparison is still a far cry from easy or reasonable, or anything of the sort, but hilariously, or bleakly enough, Smeargle shifted its attention away from full chain and was now dead set on procuring auto wins much more quickly with much less support than the protracted agony of a full chain setup, with substitute and belly drum, meaning it achieved a +6 attack and a +1 speed in two perfectly compatible synergistic turns of setup, easily achieved through its trusty Spore, proceeding to pass the maxed out power to a bevy of physical sweepers that would then win the game on the spot. Fearing a phaser? Don't worry, its teammate's Suction Cup Cradilly, which is an ability that prevents you from being switched out, is the recipient for you. Alternatively, you can also go with Soundproof Exploud if you're facing Roar users, since Roar is a sound move. Not every team can even threaten phasing either, so in that case you just pass the Choice Band Metagross and KO almost quite literally everything with Meteor Mash, even defensive Swampert. You can also go with Aerodactyl or Metachamp for more accurate options. This strategy plagued tournaments for years. One failed attempt to nerf Baton Pass followed the other, over and over, until we arrive at today's state of affairs, where they finally said that one cannot pass both speed and another stat. Smeargle was not the only perpetrator of Baton Pass's brokenness, but it was the most involved to be sure, with its antics leading to the collateral elimination of strategies like Agility Pass Zapdos in conjunction with Calm Mind Pass Celebi on normal mixed offense teams. It's a shame, but Smeargle is basically why we can't have nice things. And Smeargle full chain antics actually started popping up in Gen 3 Ubers, much to the irritation of the player base, and carried over into Gen 4, where it reprised its ingrained role from the previous gen, while also throwing Amnesia in the mix to further assist in the chain's boost passing. And this pissed off so many players, with multiple attempts spanning several years to have something done about it. But the general indifferent laissez-faire passivity of the status quo allowed Smeargle and friends to continue terrorizing tournaments even when Baton Pass was gifting players who barely understood the metagame, as they openly admitted themselves, win after win after win against players more experienced in the tier. As you can see in the two examples here, it was years after these instances, which led to an actual tournament win, that Baton Pass finally got the axe. And since a lot of these events actually happened in the modern metagame of old generations, Baton Pass Smeargle would continue to menace in singles until Gen 7, which marked the quickest ban of the move yet for how vicious its Geomancy passes to Magearna were, while simultaneously, Gen 3 OU was struggling with Belly Drum Baton Pass, and this started the domino effect for Baton Pass to be on the nerf chopping block countless times. And with the ban in place, the threat of Smeargle was finally laid to rest.
Thus solving the problem once and for all. Once and for all!
Just kidding, there's still a lot of time in this video left, as you can see, and that's because we've only talked about a popular but community-run format who had to deal with the scourge that is Smeargle. Let's now look into the world of VGC, the official format where the Pokemon Company is actually involved.
It is able to use the Dark Void and it will connect.
Whoa, hey, we ain't there yet, Eager McBeaver. We still have 3 more generations left. You think the VGC player base's hatred of Smeargle only started in 2016? Of course not. It goes way back to Generation 4. It was competitive Pokemon's first major renaissance thanks to the new Wi-Fi battling feature and many internet forums. February 2007. Diamond and Pearl had been out for 5 months already, and Smeargle is, surprisingly, pretty useless. Game Freak reveals a new mythical Pokemon, Darkrai, the Nightmare Pokemon. But thanks to data miners, fans have known this Pokemon was coming for a while. They know its stats, typing, ability, and they know about its signature move. Now, at the time, this wasn't that big a deal, but what those unsuspecting fans don't know is that move, the move that no one is sparing a second thought, is going to plunge Pokemon into the nightmares over which Darkrai reigns. It's just, it won't be Darkrai doing it, it's Smeargle. Because Smeargle can copy any move, and that includes this one, the move that will break the game, Dark Void. So why aren't people worried about it? Well, that's a bit complex to answer, but the simple reason reason is the move didn't look that good. Dark Void is a move that puts your Pokemon to sleep, but it only has 80% accuracy, unlike the 100% accurate Spore. Every Smeargle set in OU uses Spore as its sleep move of choice, and Dark Void has no upside in singles. But in doubles, that wasn't the case, because in doubles, Dark Void targets both Pokemon, and people still weren't worried about Darkrai. Why? Well, two reasons. First of all, competitive doubles barely existed at the time. When Darkrai first released, there hadn't been an official Pokemon World Championship since the 2000s one-off Pokemon World Champions played on Pokemon Stadium. And if people were thinking about competitive battles, it was mainly about singles that was played either on Wi-Fi or Shoddy Battle, the precursor to today's Pokemon Showdown. And in singles, Darkrai was quickly relegated to Ubers, where Dark Void felt in line with the other massively powerful Pokemon in the tier. But in 2008, Pokemon announced the first World Championship in 8 years, the Video Game Showdown 2008, a single elimination, best of one 64-person tournament. Qualifiers would take place across tournaments with a series of 6 regionals in Japan and 2 in the US, leading to one crowning event that would be held alongside the 2008 Trading Card Game World Champions, and these tournaments would be using double battles. But still, Darkrai wasn't a worry, because Darkrai, along with other box legendaries and mythicals, were banned. But you know who wasn't banned and who could use Dark Void just as well? Well, that would be Smeargle, of course. And Smeargle was one of the 4 Pokemon that Izuru Yoshimura used to win the Japanese national qualifier, alongside Bronzong, Metagross, and Snorlax. Dark Void may have been worse than Spore in singles, but it might have just been the single best move in the game in doubles. And that 80% accuracy is a lot easier to stomach when you're targeting 2 Pokemon at once. There is probably no feeling in Pokemon more gut-wrenching than getting hit by a double Dark Void. It is one of the only moves in the game that can inspire the despair of instantly losing turn 1. When Knott said sleep is the cousin of death, he was thinking about this Beagle. Sleep isn't a death sentence, but a double sleep in a format that can be as fast-paced as VGC may as well be. Let me say it plainly. This move was not balanced. But what does Smeargle do other than getting Dark Void off? Well, again, despite its awful stats, it could do whatever it wanted. Its move pool only constrained by imagination. But in practice, you were usually looking at something else that was unique to Smeargle, the combination of Fake Out and Follow Me. These moves made Smeargle possibly the best and most infuriating support Pokemon in the game, at least before the cat, capable of stealing turn after turn. This thing would make it impossible to hit its partner, whether through flinches, sleeps, or redirections, a strategy that paid off perfectly for Izuru, who was running a hard Trick Room strategy, aka a tactic that just needed 1 turn to set up. In fact, Izuru used a level 1 Smeargle because Fake Out and Follow Me are both priority moves, and he took it for granted that Smeargle would probably knock to Focus Sash anyways. Level 1 simply made him as slow as possible to use his other 2 moves, Endeavor and of course, Dark Void. Izuru brought these 4 Pokemon to the VGS, and his trusty squad took him all the way to finals where he faced Yasuhito Kajiwara, packing a team with his own Metagross and a suite of legendaries, Latios, Zapdos, and the full moon to counter Smeargle's stolen darkness, Cresselia. The battle begins, and it's Smeargle versus Cresselia from the word go. But unlike that kid in Kanalave, there would be no waking up from this bad dream for Yasuhito. Smeargle fakes out Cresselia turn 1, tanks a hit from Metagross, and lets Bronzong get a Trick Room up. From there, Smeargle launches a Dark Void, and it hits both of Yasuhito's Pokemon, who both happen to be holding a Lunberry, and wake up immediately, taking down Smeargle. But the damage is done. Berry expended, Bronzong is able to get a hypnosis of its own off, and with only Cresselia awake, Izuru is free to set up Belly Drum and psych up with Metagross, and from there he's able to fight his way to victory, giving a level 1 Dark Void Smeargle its first ever tournament win, in what is essentially the first ever Double Battle World Championships. So that's it, right? Smeargle starts at the top of the mountain and spreads its stolen bad dreams for the rest of time, until the developers said enough was enough. No, well, yes, but no. Smeargle actually fell off in 2009 and 2010. It became a niche pick people had to prep for, but by no means a metagame defining threat. But then Gen 5 came around, and fittingly, Smeargle was given another ruinous tool. Why? Moody, if you're not familiar with this ability, is maybe one of the only things in the game more infuriating than, oh, I don't know, having both of your Pokemon put to sleep on turn 1. Smeargle saw people complaining already and said, you haven't seen anything yet. Every turn, Moody randomly raises one of your 7 stats by 2 stages and lowers another by 1 stage for a net gain of 1 stat. This ability had Bidoof sweeping Ubers and singles, so of course Smeargle abused it to absurd extents. But let's just take a moment to collectively shudder at the memory of Smeargle baton passing Moody boost. Moody got canned pretty quickly in OU, but surprisingly in VGC, Smeargle found itself in inhospitable conditions because in 2012 and 2013, for the first time ever, the Pokemon Company explicitly banned the move from competition. They banned Dark Void. Well, technically they also banned Skydrop starting in 2011, but that's because you could basically Ice Climber's freeze glitch someone with that move. Being banned for a year hadn't been enough though. Smeargle had had its most powerful tool ripped away from it. It toiled in the shadows, developing new avant-garde techniques, but Unova, it turned out, was not kind to its artistic practice. No, for that, it needed something a little more French. Though Smeargle hadn't been selected for Pokemon's first voyage outside of Japan-inspired waters, there was no question that it would be included in the Colosian regional decks. Here at last is a region that admires the arts, the birthplace of the Impressionists. City streets lined with salons and ateliers that saw the greatest painters and sculptors of the day march art with a capital A towards the future. And most importantly for Smeargle, the beret capital of the world. It would have been ridiculous not to include Smeargle in the Kalos decks, but without Dark Void, could it do anything? Well, as it turns out, that wasn't a question that needed to be answered, because for some reason, Game Freak walked back their decision on Dark Void, making it legal again, and opening up the door for a whole nother host of Smeargle shenanigans. And to make matters worse, Smeargle also now had Moody from the last generation. Back in Gen 6, Moody used to be even more broken. Earlier I said 7 stats. Let's count those stats. Attack, defense, special attack, special defense, speed. That's 5. What are the 6 and 7? Accuracy and evasion, of course. Accuracy or evasion boosts introduce unforeseen levels of salt in the opponent. A speed boost meant you could totally disrupt strategies reliant on outspeeding Smeargle, and both of the defense boosts meant that Smeargle's most glaring weakness, its frailty, disappeared, opening the door for it to disrupt your opponent again and again. Also, it could set up a free double team. And the only thing worse than one Smeargle is multiple illusory Smeargles. Well, I guess multiple real Smeargles would also be awful, but thankfully we have species clause for that. What made Moody all the more frustrating on Smeargle was that the downsides didn't often feel like real downsides. A speed or accuracy drop was unlucky, sure, especially since you didn't see too much Smeargle in Trick Room. So that's only 2 drops that really impacted your game. On the flip side, 5 of the boosts were meaningful. And even then, Smeargle had ways to play around the drops. Accuracy and speed were the big losses, but you know what move doesn't care about either of those stats? Follow me. Depending on your Smeargle's moveset, it was entirely possible you could just play around the drops. Your opponent, on the other hand, was playing a stacked game of roulette, one where the ball drops could totally disrupt the rest of their game plan. You might perfectly outplay the turn 1, maneuvering to take Smeargle out, only for it to get a speed boost that ruined your plans, one you never could have seen coming. Smeargle mostly saw play in 2014, alongside the Pokemon that would dominate early X and Y, Mega Kangaskhan. The aptly named Con Artist core was liable to steal your turns and make off with the profit. Smeargle might not have any offensive presence of its own, but that doesn't mean it lacked pressure. The simple fact of Dark Void on its moveset was enough to force protects and switches just like an attack would. So this is it, right? Moody is the secret sauce. It's the extra dose of sheer dumb luck that took Smeargle from one-hit wonder to cultural monolith. Well, no, believe it or not, we're still not there. At this point, Smeargle was a legitimate threat and a reluctantly respected annoyance. Any serious player had to account for its tendency to pop up just when you least wanted it to. But despite Smeargle's mercurial movesets, counterplay to it was still fairly basic. Sure, Scarf or Mental Herb or Magic Bounce got around Taunt to stop its non-attacking moves, but by and large, Smeargle was still shut down by the move, and without that Scarf, its speed was still largely middling. These limitations made it a big ask to use a Pokemon that instantly blew up in front of the format's most prevalent Pokemon, especially when you considered other redirection options like Amoonguss, or of course, the eventual world champion Pachirisu. And lastly, the fact that Smeargle went down to Kang so easily was, as you can imagine, a totally good thing when you were facing down other Kangaskhans that could punch straight through your sash. Kangaskhan may have been Smeargle's greatest partner, but it was also its natural predator. It kept Smeargle in check. This would be the old generation normal type to rule 2014 and 2015, and it had other preferred partners. When Chalk stormed Worlds 2015, there was nary a Smeargle to be found. Those odd ones that did show up didn't put up good results. So what gives? It wasn't Dark Void on its own that made Smeargle broken, and if it wasn't Moody plus Dark Void, what was the combination that got Smeargle to such a point that Pokemon was having clandestine meetings about its legality? And now we finally get to 2016. There is only a single time in competitive Pokemon history history that the Pokemon Company has considered banning a move mid-season. The date is January 20th, 2016, days after the first tournaments of the VGC 2016 format. The arena, the blog of Zach Bravarius Droidcomp, 4-time regional champion, hosted on the Nugget Bridge website. And though it's still the early days of the 2016 season, Zach raised an issue with a particular Pokemon. Well, really with one move, that he thinks might bear ill tidings for the health of the format. Scroll past the paragraphs of well-measured reasoning to the third page, where you find one small comment, a spare sentence from Chris Alpha Zealot Brown, director of Pokemon events and arbiter of the rule set. Quote, "We'll be watching the results closely and collecting data from the top 8 at regionals in February," end quote. That comment, vague though it may be, gets showered in likes, because everyone knew what Pokemon it was talking about. 2016 was a GS Cup format, just like 2010 where Smeargle was noticeably absent. And what that meant was that Kangaskhan, already one of the most centralizing Pokemon the game had seen, got power crept. And while that would have been true in any format allowing restricted Pokemon, it was certainly true in 2016, which introduced a whole host of new absurdly strong Pokemon to the mix, the two standouts being Primal Groudon and Xerneas. Groudon, already on 6 teams back in 2010, got an extra type and a bonkers ability that removed pretty much the only downside of said type. Xerneas was capable of becoming a solo win condition thanks to just one broken signature move and a single red herb. And what's more, the two had incredible type synergy with each other, fitting the holes in the corresponding coverage perfectly. Anything Groudon couldn't hit was liable to get moonblasted into oblivion. Anything that resisted moonblast was weak to ground, fire, or both. In fact, these two stood so far above the rest that by the time the format started, people had already figured out a whole team around the Xernodon combo, and it wasn't going to go anywhere anytime soon. This was the birth of Big Six, a team so dominant that it only missed top 8 on 3 tournaments in the entire season, a team so powerful that it could run the table on top cuts, the single most dominant team of all time. Groudon, Xerneas, Mega Kangaskhan, Mega Salamence, a slot that started as Talonflame but eventually turned into Cresselia and Bronzong, and Smeargle, which is why just 20 days into the format, Bravarius was ringing the alarm that something might not be quite right. Doswell Regionals, the first North American tournament of the year, had taken place just a week prior, and 6 of the top 8 teams were Big Six. Now hold on a second, you might say. It seems like the problem here is the team as a whole, not just one Pokemon in it. And while that was true from a power level standpoint, and would continue to be the case for most of the year, it wasn't true from a game health standpoint. You see, people weren't upset that one team was overperforming, as there certainly hadn't been any calls to ban Chalk the year prior. They were upset because it felt uncompetitive. And that stigma fell solely on the slim shoulders of our painterly pest. We've talked about Dark Void already, but we haven't dived into the numbers of it until now. It felt absolutely terrible to play against, not just because it was strong, but because it was so RNG based. First of all, there's the fact that it's a 64% chance to put both of your Pokemon to sleep, low enough that you might be tempted to disrespect it, but high enough that that was an awful mistake. Once you were put to sleep, there was the 1 in 3 RNG that determined which turn you woke up on, turns that could determine the entire rest of the game. And then to make things worse, you've got Mix-Up Master Smeargle over here, whose moveset and item are a total question mark at the start of the battle, and who just might be stacking evasion boosts while your Pokemon are napping. And that just isn't fun, dude. It's not just that it's over-centralizing, it's that it warps the game in such a way that it removes so much of the playing Pokemon aspect, literally when your Pokemon are just stuck sleeping. As Bravarius points out in his article, this isn't just a nightmare for the players, it's worst case scenario for Pokemon as well. Imagine that you're a kid who's just discovered competitive Pokemon. The Pokemon Company has worked hard to expand their scene, broadcasting tournaments so that you too can get hooked on the complex, high-stakes play that defines competitive Pokemon. You turn on your first tournament and you see this thing sending 2 legendaries to nap time. Maybe you call that intriguing, but I think a more accurate word would be boring. Now you get why Alpha Zealot was driven to that comment section. In his blog post, which was titled "A Dark Paradigm, the Overwhelming Presence of Dark Void in VGC 2016, Bravarius outlined 3 reactions to the Smeargle infestation: beat 'em, join 'em, or ignore 'em. Ignore 'em, it turned out, was pretty much a death sentence if you ran into a Dark Void user. Beat 'em worked, but required significant investment. Join 'em seemed tempting, especially when you considered you weren't just joining the Smeargle train, you were signing on to use a team that seemed to be uncrackable no matter how hard people tried. That leads us right to the most cursed matchup of all, Smeargle versus Smeargle. If you were in a Smeargle on Smeargle situation, the game could be determined by small things, if one was scarfed or had a different EV spread, or the leads being slightly different. But it could also come down to the most dumb luck aspects of Pokemon, like speed ties or Dark Void accuracy. Do we really want to be playing a game that comes down to which 75 base speed Pokemon gets out of the starting gate first? Smeargle was a threat because it was strong, but it was hated because it was unhealthy. But now it's time to answer the big question. How did we get here? Smeargle with Dark Void has been around for years. Okay, then maybe it's because it got moody during its generation off. But why didn't it dominate 2014 and 2015? There is a simple answer. Xerneas. Xerneas, as we mentioned before, was capable of taking over games completely with just one boost. Most Xerneas didn't even run any coverage moves thanks to Geomancy's obscene boost and the strength of Fairy Aura, because they didn't need to. Geomancy's special defense boost let it tank Kyogre water spouts and outrun any Tailwind users as long as it naturally outsped. Basically, Xerneas users only want one thing, and it's disgusting. And the Pokemon to let them have it? Smeargle. This was the enhanced setup Pokemon that Smeargle had been begging for. Sure, it also synergized well with Kangaskhan and Big 6, but Xerneas Smeargle was the big problem. Let's sum up what made this Pokemon and this combo so frustrating. First of all, just countering Smeargle was a pretty big task. Your dedicated counter might only work against a certain variant of Smeargle, and you had no idea of knowing which one was coming game 1. Second, investing in Smeargle counterplay was specific enough that it often meant weakening your team to other compositions, or to the Smeargle player just not bringing Smeargle. With such powerful teams in the meta, having a dead slot felt very, very bad. Third, even if you had the tools against Smeargle, you were playing a mix-up, not just with the items and moves, but with the move selection by the other team. So many of Smeargle's options covered for responses to the other options. Get turn 1 wrong, and you literally might lose the game on the spot. Fourth, losing the game in the way took control out of the player's hands. Sleep RNG made every turn after Dark Void landed a total shot in the dark, if you'll excuse the joke, lowering player agency. And fifth, even if you did absolutely everything right, if you dodged Dark Void or had counterplay or read the fake out or whatever, you could still lose to a 1 in 7 Moody boost that just decided to ruin your day. Smeargle was a problem, players saw it from the beginning of the format, and listen, the happy ending here does not come for a long time, because the Pokemon Company did not ban Dark Void, and the Big 6 with Smeargle had free reign to take control of 2016. Players did develop counterplay though, like Inner Focus Crobat that could outspeed Smeargle and avoid flinches, and Taunt Protect Thunderous provided another way out, as did Lumberries where you could fit them. Aside from Smeargle's specific counterplay, other players developed anti-Big 6 tech. Dual Primals, for example, swept through the UK Nationals, but most of the time that Big 6 was taken down, it came back stronger. A Hydra spouting new adaptable heads as soon as one was lopped off. Players were investing everything they had into beating this team, and it just didn't seem to stick. By the final tournament before Worlds, US Nationals, the Big 6 looked back on top thanks to its own Bronzong adaptation, and both Big 6 and Smeargle looked poised to cap their season off with a Worlds trophy. And then came Worlds, where only 2 Smeargle made top 8, and not a single one made top 4. And for what reason? Well, for that we look to Wolfie. Wolf had developed his team alongside fellow top 4 Masters finisher Marcus Statter and top 8 Seniors finisher Brendan Zhang. This team was packed full of tools to handle both 6 and the rest of the field, but we're going to focus on the anti-Smeargle tools. Mega Gengar, a key part of the team for many reasons, could dodge Fake Out, outspeed Smeargle, and taunt it. Him on top could feint or Fake Out, breaking Focus Sash immediately, but perhaps most powerful of all was the very Bronzong Big 6 teams had integrated themselves. Those Bronzongs, the ones we saw at US Nationals, had also been used as Smeargle counters, with Lum or Chestoberry as the most common item, but Wolf, Marcus, and Brendan took it a step further. They added Safeguard, a way to protect the entire team from Dark Void in one single move. But I don't mean to make it seem like Wolf and co were the only ones ready for Smeargle. And if you look at the rest of the teams in Top Cut, you'll see a trend. All of them integrated these anti-Smeargle techs, each in different ways. Fate, Hitmontop, Taunt Thunderous, Safeguard Bronzong, some combinations of these anti-Smeargle tools appeared on nearly every team that made Top 8. Even the Smeargles themselves had anti-Smeargle tech. Aaron Trailer outfitted his with Crafty Shield and Spiky Shield to either absorb a Dark Void or break a Sash on Fake Out, while Barry Baz Anderson ran a switcheroo Choice Scarf version. At the end of the format, the top players of the world had made a decision. You needed to be ready for Smeargle, because this Worlds is not a story of Smeargle failing. It's a demonstration of just how powerful it was. Those who succeeded gave Smeargle the respect it deserved. That's the best endorsement you can get. Below the top 8, Smeargle still lurked. It was on half of all teams in top 32, the third most used Pokemon in the tournament after Primal Groudon and Mega Kangaskhan. Heck, more Smeargle made day 2 than Xerneas. When 2016 ended, the results were clear. Smeargle had won, maybe not the championship, but the game. It had sculpted Pokemon in the form it saw, forcibly refashioning the game to conform to its singular vision. Sure, GS Cup was gone, but the fear still loomed. If Smeargle was really this good, could it succeed that way in years to come? Pokemon had been defined by Smeargle for better and, as most people felt, for worse. And as it turns out, Game Freak agreed with that sentiment. A Pokemon company may not have taken action during the 2016 season, but they were certainly monitoring tournaments, just like they said. First of all, they modified Moody to only affect the core 5 stats. No more free accuracy or evasion boosts to turn games on their head. That by itself might have kept Smeargle intact, but Game Freak wasn't done. After all, Moody wasn't the biggest problem. That was Dark Void. So Game Freak slashed the move to pieces, reducing its accuracy all the way down to 50%, lower than Hypnosis. And you know what? Both of those didn't even matter because Game Freak had one more adjustment in store. They were limiting Smeargle's palette. Starting in Generation 7, Dark Void would always fail unless it was used by Darkrai itself. And with Darkrai banned from competition for the foreseeable future, that meant Dark Void had been removed from play. Dark Void was dead, and Smeargle along with it. And also, Darkrai started using Hypnosis because of Dark Void's accuracy nerf, paying for the sins of Smeargle, even though Darkrai isn't even allowed in VGC, and the move already can't be used by Smeargle. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu for their major support of our videos.